January 21st, 1972. A cold wind swept through the streets of Lower Manhattan. Outside the federal courthouse, reporters crowded behind police barricades. Camera flashes lit up the gray afternoon as a convoy of black sedans rolled slowly toward the entrance. Federal agents stepped out first. Then came the man everyone had been waiting to see. He didn't lower his head. He didn't hide his face. Instead, he adjusted his expensive overcoat, glanced calmly at the cameras, and smiled. It wasn't the smile of someone facing prison. It was the smile of someone who believed the law could never truly touch him. For years, politicians feared him. Businessmen paid him. Gangsters answered to him. Even powerful mafia bosses thought twice before crossing him. To the public, he was just another well-dressed businessman. To the FBI, he was the invisible ruler of America's most powerful criminal empire. And to those inside the mafia, he was simply the chin. But power inside the mafia was never measured by money alone. It was measured by loyalty, fear, and silence. Because in that world, a single conversation could end a life. A single mistake could erase decades of power. And sometimes, the final words spoken by a mafia boss carried more weight than an entire lifetime of violence. For decades, rumors spread about what America's most feared mafia leaders said in their final moments. Some denied everything. Some begged for mercy. Some remained loyal to the code until their last breath. Others revealed a side nobody expected. But one story stood above them all. A story whispered by detectives, former mob associates, and the men who survived long enough to tell it. Because the last words of one mafia boss didn't just mark the end of a man. They marked the beginning of the end for an empire that had ruled America's underworld for generations. The question was, how does a man who spent his entire life commanding fear face the one thing he could never control? Death. The answer begins decades earlier, long before the courtroom, long before the investigations, and long before the silence that would become his final legacy, long before the expensive suits, before the bodyguards, before federal agents spent decades trying to prove he even existed. There was a skinny kid growing up in New York City during the Great Depression. His name was Vincent "the Chin" Gigani. He was born in the Bronx in 1928 to Italian immigrant parents who believed hard work could build an honest life. His father worked as a watchmaker. His mother raised 5 children in a neighborhood where survival often depended on who controlled the streets. The family wasn't rich, but they had something many others didn't: stability. For a while, as Vincent grew older, school held little interest. He dropped out after the 8th grade, choosing instead to spend his days on neighborhood corners where bookmakers, loan sharks, and street toughs seemed to have everything a young man admired: money, respect, power. It didn't take long before the streets became his classroom. At first, he ran small errands: deliver a package, watch a doorway, pass along a message. Simple jobs, the kind that never seemed dangerous, until you realized who was giving the orders. The Bronx was filled with ambitious young criminals trying to earn a place inside New York's growing mafia families. Every favor was remembered. Every mistake was punished. Vincent learned quickly. He also learned one lesson that would shape the rest of his life: never talk. In the mafia, silence wasn't just respect. It was survival. Those who spoke too much rarely lived long enough to regret it. By his late teens, Vincent had earned another reputation. He could fight, not just street fights, professional fights, standing over 6 feet tall with quick hands and surprising speed. He became a promising boxer. Between 1944 and 1947, he fought professionally as a heavyweight. Inside the ring, opponents feared his punches. Outside the ring, dangerous men noticed something even more valuable: his discipline, his patience, his willingness to follow orders without asking questions. Boxing gave him confidence. The streets gave him opportunity. Eventually, the choice between the two became impossible. Prize money disappeared after one fight. Mafia money never seemed to stop. So Vincent walked away from boxing. He never looked back. It wasn't because he failed. It was because he had found a profession where the rewards were far greater, and the rules were far more brutal. Around this time, one man began paying close attention to the young fighter. His name was Vito Genovese. Unlike many mafia bosses who ruled from the shadows, Genovese believed in building an army of loyal men who valued obedience above everything else. Vincent fit the mold perfectly. He rarely argued. He rarely lost his temper in public. And, perhaps most importantly, he never attracted unnecessary attention. That made him useful. Very useful. Soon, the small errands turned into bigger assignments. Debt collections, extortion, illegal gambling operations, protection rackets. Each successful job brought him closer to the inner circle of what would become one of the most powerful organized crime families in American history. The money changed everything. Tailored suits replaced worn-out jackets. Luxury cars appeared where old sedans once stood. The young man from the Bronx was becoming someone people stepped aside for without being asked. Fear has a strange way of introducing itself, sometimes without a single word. But New York's underworld was crowded with ambitious men. Power wasn't simply handed over. It had to be earned. And often, it had to be taken. That opportunity arrived in 1957. It was one of the most shocking events in Mafia history. Frank Costello, the powerful boss of the Genovese crime family, was walking into the lobby of his Manhattan apartment building when a gunman stepped out from the shadows. One shot echoed through the hallway. The bullet grazed Costello's head. Miraculously, he survived. The gunman didn't stay to finish the job. He disappeared into the streets almost as quickly as he had appeared. Authorities quickly focused on one suspect, Vincent Gigani. Witnesses believed they recognized him, but proving it would be another matter. Costello refused to identify the shooter, whether out of fear, respect for Mafia rules, or a desire to avoid even more bloodshed. He remained silent. Without his testimony, prosecutors had almost nothing. The case collapsed. Gigani walked free. Inside Mafia circles, however, everyone understood what had happened. The attempted assassination wasn't just another hit. It was a message. Power inside the family was changing hands, and Vito Genovese intended to become the undisputed boss. The failed assassination accomplished exactly what it needed to. Costello quietly stepped aside. Genovese took control, and Vincent Gigani's loyalty had been rewarded. He had proven something priceless. He could be trusted with the organization's darkest secrets. From that moment forward, his status rose rapidly. Older mobsters respected him. Younger associates feared disappointing him. Law enforcement placed his name higher and higher on investigation files. But every new promotion came with greater expectations. The higher you climbed inside the Mafia, the harder it became to climb back down. For years, Gigani expanded his influence through construction, labor unions, gambling, loan sharking, and businesses that appeared perfectly legitimate from the outside. He understood something many gangsters never did. Real power wasn't found in back alley shootings. It was found in boardrooms, union offices, construction contracts, political connections. The less violence people saw, the more powerful you became. While other mobsters chased headlines, Gigani stayed in the background. He preferred whispers over publicity. Invisible men were harder to arrest, harder to prosecute, harder to destroy. The FBI watched him constantly. Agents followed his meetings, photographed his associates, recorded license plate numbers, built charts connecting hundreds of suspected criminals. Still, they struggled to make anything stick. Witnesses disappeared. Evidence vanished. Nobody talked. To the outside world, Vincent Gigani looked like another successful businessman with strong community ties. To those inside organized crime, he was becoming something much more dangerous. A man who could quietly influence decisions affecting thousands of criminals without ever raising his voice. But hidden beneath his calm personality was another weapon: patience. Unlike ambitious young gangsters desperate for quick promotions, Gigani believed time solved almost every problem. Rivals grew careless. Witnesses changed their stories. Investigations lost momentum. Sooner or later, everyone made mistakes. He simply waited, and when the moment finally arrived, he moved without hesitation. By the late 1970s, many inside the Mafia already believed Vincent Gigani was the true power behind the Genovese family. Yet another challenge was approaching, one that couldn't be solved with intimidation alone. Across New York, rival bosses were beginning to reshape the rules of organized crime. Some wanted peace, others wanted war. Federal investigators were becoming smarter. Electronic surveillance was improving. Informants were beginning to cooperate. For the first time in decades, the Mafia's greatest enemy wasn't another crime family. It was the government itself. And Vincent Gigani was about to make a decision that would define the rest of his life. A decision so unusual that millions of Americans would eventually know him not as a ruthless mafia boss, but as the man who wandered New York City in a bathrobe, talking to himself. Most people believed he had lost his mind. Others believed it was the greatest performance in mafia history. The truth was even more unbelievable. By the early 1980s, Vincent Gigani had become one of the most powerful men in organized crime. Officially, he wasn't the boss. At least, that's what everyone claimed. On paper, other names appeared higher in the hierarchy. Meetings were arranged through trusted intermediaries. Orders passed from one captain to another. Nobody was supposed to know who was really in charge. But inside the Genovese family, the truth was understood without ever being spoken. If the Chin approved a decision, it happened. If he rejected it, the conversation was over. That invisible authority became his greatest weapon. Unlike flashy mafia leaders who craved attention, Gigani believed power was strongest when nobody could prove it existed. He rarely attended large gatherings. He avoided expensive nightclubs. He stayed away from television cameras. Instead, he met trusted captains in parked cars, quiet social clubs, and private apartments where every visitor was carefully watched before being allowed inside. The fewer people who saw him, the fewer people could testify against him. It was a simple philosophy, and for years, it worked. While other crime families battled for headlines, the Genovese family quietly expanded its influence through labor unions, construction companies, gambling operations, and multi-million-dollar extortion schemes. Money flowed through New York like an invisible river. Every construction contract, every trucking route, every union negotiation, every illegal betting operation, someone, somewhere was paying tribute. Gigani understood that violence attracted investigators. Business attracted profits. That difference made the Genovese family richer than many of its rivals. But power inside the mafia was never permanent. Every boss eventually faced a choice: adapt or disappear. During the same period, another mafia leader was changing the rules of organized crime. John Gotti loved attention, expensive suits, television interviews, crowds of reporters waiting outside courthouses. Newspapers called him the Dapper Don. He embraced the publicity. Gigani hated it. To him, Gotti's celebrity wasn't impressive. It was reckless. Every headline invited more surveillance. Every interview encouraged more investigations. Every public appearance gave federal agents another opportunity to build a case. The contrast between the two men couldn't have been greater. One ruled through visibility. The other ruled through invisibility. Inside mafia circles, many older bosses quietly sided with Gigani. The old code had always favored silence. Stay out of the newspapers. Never boast. Never seek fame, because fame had a price. Sooner or later, someone always came to collect. As the FBI intensified its war against organized crime, prosecutors introduced a powerful new strategy: the RICO Act. Instead of charging gangsters for individual crimes, prosecutors could now target entire criminal organizations. One witness could expose dozens of people. One recording could destroy years of secrecy. For mafia bosses, this changed everything. The code of silence was suddenly under enormous pressure, and Gigani responded in a way nobody expected. He began acting insane. Neighbors saw him wander in Greenwich Village wearing nothing but a bathrobe and slippers. Sometimes he muttered to himself. Sometimes he stared into space. Sometimes he appeared completely unaware of the world around him. Police officers who encountered him often assumed he was mentally ill. Reporters laughed. Photographers filled newspapers with strange pictures of the mysterious mobster walking the streets like a confused old man. Many Americans believed they were witnessing the slow collapse of a once dangerous gangster. But FBI agents weren't convinced. Too many things didn't add up. Despite his bizarre public behavior, the Genovese family remained remarkably organized. Extortion payments continued. Illegal businesses expanded. Disputes were settled quickly. Someone was still giving orders. The question was, who? Behind closed doors, investigators suspected the answer had never changed. The bathrobe wasn't evidence of madness. It was camouflage, a carefully rehearsed performance designed to keep him out of prison. For years, psychiatrists examined him. Defense attorneys argued he suffered from severe mental illness. Court hearings stretched on endlessly. Each delay bought him something priceless: time. While prosecutors fought over medical reports, Gigani continued ruling one of America's most powerful mafia organizations from the shadows. It was one of the most successful deception campaigns in organized crime history, or so it seemed, because even the best performance depends on one dangerous assumption: that everyone keeps the secret. Eventually, someone didn't. The FBI had spent decades chasing Gigani. Wiretaps, hidden microphones, financial records, informants. Most efforts led nowhere. Then the government found a crack in the wall. Former insiders began cooperating. Some wanted lighter prison sentences. Others feared they would be killed if they stayed loyal. For the first time, investigators weren't relying only on surveillance. They had voices from inside the mafia itself. Those witnesses described a carefully controlled organization where Gigani approved promotions, settled disputes, and made the family's most important decisions while pretending to be mentally incompetent in public. It was exactly what prosecutors had suspected for years. Now, they had people willing to say it under oath. The walls that had protected him for decades were beginning to close. Even so, Gigani refused to panic. He had survived assassination attempts, gang wars, federal investigations, changing generations of mafia leadership. He believed he could survive this too. But organized crime had entered a new era. The greatest threat was no longer rival families. It was betrayal from within. The mafia had always demanded absolute loyalty. Yet loyalty became much harder to buy when men faced life behind bars. Every arrest created another potential witness. Every conviction weakened the code of silence. And every cooperator brought federal agents one step closer to the man who had spent years pretending he couldn't even remember his own name. Gigani had built his empire on discipline, on patience, on secrecy. Now those same foundations were beginning to crack. Because once the government proved that the Chin was acting, every decision he had made over the previous 2 decades would suddenly look very different. The performance that protected him for years was about to become the evidence that helped destroy him. And the man who had spent a lifetime avoiding the spotlight was finally running out of places to hide. For more than 3 decades, Vincent the Chin Gigani had done what many believed was impossible. He had outlasted rival bosses. He had survived federal investigations. He had avoided the endless bloodshed that destroyed other mafia empires. Most importantly, he had stayed free. While famous mob bosses filled newspaper headlines and prison cells, Gigani continued ruling from the shadows, protected by layers of loyal captains, trusted messengers, and one extraordinary performance. But no empire lasts forever, and neither does fear. By the 1990s, the Mafia was no longer the untouchable organization it had once been. The old code was breaking apart. For generations, Omerta, the sacred law of silence, had been stronger than almost anything. A man could spend 20 years in prison without speaking. Some even accepted death before betraying their family. Now, that tradition was collapsing. Federal prosecutors had changed the game. Instead of chasing bosses one crime at a time, they targeted entire organizations. They offered reduced sentences, witness protection, a second chance at life. And one by one, men who had sworn lifelong loyalty began telling the government everything they knew. Each confession filled another gap. Each witness connected another piece of the puzzle. The invisible empire was slowly becoming visible. Gigani understood exactly what this meant. He had spent his entire career preparing for police raids. He knew how to avoid surveillance. He knew how to communicate without leaving evidence. But there was no perfect defense against a man sitting across a courtroom, pointing a finger and saying he was the boss. That kind of testimony couldn't simply disappear. As more insiders cooperated, prosecutors built the strongest case they had ever assembled against the Genovese family. Wiretaps confirmed conversations. Financial records revealed hidden relationships. Former captains explained the chain of command. Suddenly, decades of scattered evidence fit together like pieces of a single picture. And, at the center of that picture, was Vincent Gigani. His lawyers continued arguing that he was mentally incapable of standing trial. They presented years of psychiatric evaluations, medical records, expert testimony. They insisted the strange man wandering New York in a bathrobe wasn't pretending. He was genuinely ill. For years, that strategy had delayed justice. But the government had been watching just as patiently. Investigators uncovered conversations suggesting Gigani could discuss complex business matters in private, while acting completely confused in public. Witnesses described secret meetings where he gave detailed instructions, settled disputes, and approved major criminal operations. The contrast was impossible to ignore. In public, a helpless old man. Behind closed doors, a calculating mafia leader. The mask was finally slipping. Then came the moment Gigani had spent years trying to avoid. In 1997, he was convicted on racketeering and conspiracy charges. The sentence was severe, years behind federal prison walls. For most men, it would have marked the end. But even then,